Daniel's morning started like any other. The city was alive with noise and hurry. Cars honked impatiently, buses rumbled down the road, and people moved quickly, each one lost in their own world. Everyone seemed to be in a rush to get somewhere, and no one had the time to slow down. The crosswalk lights blinked red and green, guiding the flow of people, but it was still chaotic. Daniel, a young man in his early 20s, walked quickly, his office bag swinging slightly at his side. He had an important meeting that day, and his mind was filled with thoughts of what he had to do. Yet, as he walked through the busy street, something unusual caught his eye. On the other side of the crosswalk, near the corner of the sidewalk, stood an elderly lady. She was small, fragile-looking, with silver hair tied neatly back and a cane in her hand. The city noise seemed too loud for her, too overwhelming. Her face showed hesitation, as if the world around her was moving too fast for her tired legs. While dozens of people rushed past her, none of them stopped to notice. She stood still, waiting, almost invisible among the sea of strangers. Daniel slowed his pace for a moment. He could see the struggle in her eyes. The light turned green, and the crowd surged forward like a wave, but the elderly lady remained on the sidewalk. She lifted her cane slightly, then lowered it again. Cars in the distance revved their engines, ready to move as soon as the light changed back. The young man noticed the worry on her face, the worry of not being able to cross in time, of being left alone in the middle of the road. For Daniel, it was just another morning, yet something inside him stirred. He could have ignored her, just like everyone else. After all, he was running late. But his heart wouldn't allow him to walk past. He thought of his own grandmother, who used to wait for him to visit every weekend. She too had struggled with weak knees and slow steps. But she always smiled when he offered his arm to help her walk across the garden. The memory made Daniel's decision clear. He stopped walking and turned toward the lady. The noise of the city seemed to fade for a moment. People brushed past him, annoyed that he was slowing down the flow. But Daniel didn't care. He watched the lady carefully, noticing how tightly she gripped her cane, her knuckles pale from the effort. She looked at the street as if it was a river she could not cross. Daniel walked closer. "Good morning," he said gently, his voice calm. The old woman looked up, surprised that someone had spoken to her. For a second, her eyes searched his face, unsure whether he was talking to her or just passing by. Daniel smiled reassuringly. "Would you like some help crossing the street?" Her lips trembled into a small smile, and she nodded slowly. It was as if she had been waiting for someone to notice her, to offer a hand in a world that seemed too fast and unkind. Relief filled her tired eyes, and she whispered, "Thank you, young man." At that moment, Daniel forgot about his meeting, about the ticking clock, about everything else. The morning no longer felt ordinary, it had shifted into something meaningful. He offered his arm, steady and strong, and she carefully placed her hand on it. Together, they waited for the next light to turn green. The crowd around them moved impatiently, but Daniel stood calmly, making sure she felt safe. The city didn't slow down for them. Cars still honked, cyclists still weaved through the gaps, and people still hurried across. Yet, for Daniel and the elderly woman, the moment was different. It was quiet, gentle, almost peaceful. He noticed the way she straightened her back slightly, gaining confidence because she wasn't alone anymore. She leaned on him just enough to steady herself, but not so much that she felt weak. As the signal changed and the walk light blinked, Daniel guided her forward. Step by step, they moved together across the street. The woman's cane tapped softly on the asphalt, and Daniel adjusted his pace to match hers. Around them, others hurried by, some glancing briefly, others ignoring completely. But to Daniel, this small act meant more than anything else he had planned that morning. The street was wide, and for someone with slow steps, it felt endless. Halfway through, the old woman tightened her grip slightly. nervous about the cars that waited impatiently at the edge of the crossing. Daniel spoke softly. "Don't worry, we'll make it across safely. I'm right here with you." His calm voice reassured her, and she nodded, focusing on each step. When they finally reached the other side, the woman let out a small breath of relief. She looked up at him with gratitude shining in her eyes. In that simple moment, an ordinary morning had transformed into something unforgettable. Daniel realized that sometimes the greatest stories begin not with grand gestures, but with the decision to stop, notice, and care. The young man hadn't just helped her cross a street. He had crossed into her world, a world where kindness still mattered. And though he didn't know it yet, this small choice would lead to something far bigger than he ever imagined. The traffic light blinked green again, and once more the sea of people surged forward. Some jogged, some hurried with coffee cups in their hands. Others pulled children along as if the whole world depended on reaching the other side as fast as possible. The elderly woman still stood there, motionless, clutching her cane as the waves of people passed her by. Daniel noticed how invisible she seemed to everyone else. Hundreds of eyes looked past her, but no one truly saw her. They were too busy, too focused on themselves, to care about the frail woman trembling at the corner of the street. He thought for a second about walking away after all. His office was only a few blocks away, and he was already cutting it close for his meeting. But something in his heart wouldn't let him. He had seen kindness growing up in small moments. It's a kind that most people forget. His grandfather used to say, "Helping someone who cannot repay you is the truest form of wealth." Those words returned to him now, clear as day. Daniel stepped toward her, weaving through the crowd. The closer he got, the more he could see her struggle. Her breathing was shallow, her steps shaky, and her cane rattled softly against the pavement. She was not only afraid of crossing, she was afraid of falling, of being left behind in the middle of the road while strangers rushed past. "Ma'am," Daniel said softly as he reached her side. "Do you need help?" Her head lifted slowly, as if she hadn't expected anyone to notice. For a moment, she just stared at him, uncertain whether his words were truly meant for her. Then her lips curved into the smallest of smiles. "Oh, young man, if you wouldn't mind." Her voice trembled, filled with both relief and surprise. Daniel offered his arm. "Of course. Let's go together." She hesitated for a second, as if testing whether she could trust him. But then she gently placed her hand on his arm. Her grip was light, yet it spoke volumes of trust, of need, of quiet dignity. He felt the weight of that simple gesture. It wasn't just about helping her walk. It was about reminding her that she wasn't forgotten. The light turned green again. Daniel looked both ways, making sure the path was clear, then began to walk slowly, matching his steps with hers. The woman leaned slightly on her cane, but more on his steady arm. Her shoes tapped against the asphalt, careful and slow, as though each step carried decades of stories and struggles. The world around them didn't pause. Buses rumbled, motorcycles zoomed by impatiently, and people overtook them, sighing under their breath about how slow they were. But Daniel didn't rush. He kept his pace steady, blocking the rush of strangers from brushing too close to her. He was her shield in the chaos. Halfway across, a car honked loudly as if to hurry them along. The woman flinched, her steps faltering. Daniel tightened his arm slightly, reassuring her. "It's all right," he said calmly. "We're safe. We'll make it." Those words seemed to give her courage. She lifted her chin and continued walking, each step stronger than the last. To her, Daniel wasn't just a stranger anymore. He was the reason she could cross that street without fear. Finally, they reached the other side. The woman let out a shaky laugh, almost like a child who had conquered a great challenge. "Thank you," she whispered. "You have no idea how much this means to me." Daniel smiled warmly. It was nothing. But deep inside, he knew it wasn't nothing. In a city that moved too fast, stopping for someone like her was everything. The woman didn't let go of his arm immediately. She looked up at him with misty eyes, her expression filled with gratitude that words could barely capture. It was as if she had been carrying a silent burden of loneliness for years. And in that short walk, Daniel had lightened it to Daniel. It was just an act of kindness, something his heart told him was the right thing to do. But to the elderly woman, it was so much more. It was dignity. It was hope. It was proof that the world still held people who cared. What Daniel didn't know was that this simple moment, this walk across the street, was about to change his life in ways he could never have imagined. When the two of them finally reached the other side of the street, the crowd behind them moved on as if nothing special had happened. People rushed into shops, buses swallowed passengers, and bicycles zipped past without a glance. To the busy world, it was just another morning. But for the elderly lady, it was not ordinary at all. She stood there, holding Daniel's arm for a moment longer, her breathing still a little shaky. She had faced the street like it was a mountain, and now she had crossed it with his help. Slowly, she let go of his arm, but her eyes stayed fixed on him. Daniel was about to step back, ready to continue his walk to work, when he noticed the way she was looking at him. It wasn't the usual quick thank you that strangers gave in passing. Her gaze was deep, almost searching. It was the look of someone who saw more than just a young man who had stopped to help. Was the look of someone who saw a memory coming alive. "You remind me of someone," she said softly. Her voice was gentle but carried weight, as if she was speaking to herself as much as to him. Daniel tilted his head slightly, curious. "Someone you knew." She smiled, and though her face was lined with wrinkles, that smile had a warmth that seemed timeless. "Yes, my son. He used to hold my arm the same way you just did. Firm, but gentle. Always making sure I didn't stumble." The words hit Daniel unexpectedly. For a brief second, he felt a lump in his throat. He didn't know this woman, didn't know her life or her family. Yet in this one act of kindness, he had stirred an old memory in her heart. Her eyes glistened, and she reached out to pat his hand with her fragile fingers. "It's been many years since anyone looked at me with such care. Most people walk past me as if I don't exist. But you..." She paused, her voice trembling with emotion. "You stopped. You saw me?" Daniel stood still, unsure of what to say. He wasn't someone who usually looked for recognition for his actions. To him, it had been a natural choice, something his conscience told him was right. Yet hearing her words, seeing the tears in her eyes, made him realize how rare and powerful a simple act of kindness could be. The elderly lady lowered herself slowly onto a nearby bench. "Would you sit with me for a moment?" she asked. Daniel hesitated. He thought of the time of the meeting he was supposed to attend, of the emails waiting for him. But something stronger than all of that kept him rooted in place. He nodded and sat down beside her. For a few seconds, they both watched the world move around them. Strangers hurried past, eyes on their phones, voices raised in rushed conversations. The city roared with impatience. But on that bench, there was stillness. "Do you know why I smiled when you helped me?" she asked. Daniel looked at her, waiting, "Because I had been standing there for 15 minutes. She said, her voice calm but heavy. Dozens of people walked by. Some glanced at me, some looked away quickly, but no one stopped. I thought, perhaps I would have to wait until someone I knew came along. But then you appeared." Her words painted a picture in Daniel's mind. He imagined her standing there, feeling invisible, hoping for kindness that never came. The thought filled him with both sadness and pride that he had been the one to finally notice. "You don't owe me thanks," Daniel said gently. "Anyone should have done the same." "But they didn't," she replied quickly, almost sharply, though her tone softened after. "That's why it matters when someone finally does. Her eyes met his again, and in them he saw not just gratitude, but something deeper, something unspoken. It was as if she carried a secret, one that she wasn't sure whether to share. Daniel felt an odd sense of anticipation. He had helped her cross the street, yes, but now it seemed as though he had unknowingly crossed into her life, into a story that was waiting to unfold. The old woman leaned back slightly, her hands folded in her lap. "Young man," she said after a pause, "you may think this was just a small thing, but to me, it was not." Sometimes the smallest moments open the biggest doors. Daniel listened, his heart strangely restless. He didn't know what she meant yet, but he could sense something important was about to follow. Her gratitude was not just a polite thank you. It was heavy, layered with meaning, almost as if it came with a gift hidden behind it. Daniel had no idea that this morning, which began so ordinary, was about to take a turn he would remember for the rest of his life. And as he sat there, watching her gather her thoughts, he felt that his journey was only just beginning. Daniel sat beside the elderly woman on the bench, the morning air buzzing with city noise around them. Cars honked impatiently, footsteps echoed along the pavement, and voices blended into a blur of hurried conversations. Yet on that bench, time felt slower. There was something unusual in the way the woman looked at him, something that told him this meeting wasn't going to end with just a polite, "Thank you." She adjusted her cane carefully and took a deep breath, as if preparing to say something important. Daniel waited patiently. He could feel that she wanted to speak, but was searching for the right words. Her eyes softened when they rested on him, and then she said quietly, "Would you mind sitting with me for a little while longer?" Daniel glanced at his watch. His meeting would start soon. But for some reason, the thought of leaving felt wrong. He nodded. "Of course. I don't mind." A faint smile appeared on her face, as if she had been hoping for that answer. She reached into her small leather handbag, her wrinkled fingers moving slowly but with care. Daniel assumed she might pull out a handkerchief or maybe a piece of candy, something simple. Instead, after a moment of searching, she brought out a worn envelope. Its edges were creased, its color faded with time. But she held it as though it were something precious. She placed it gently on her lap, her fingers resting on it protectively. Daniel's curiosity grew. He wondered what could be inside an old letter, perhaps, or a photograph. But before he could ask, she looked him straight in the eyes and said, "This is for you." Daniel blinked, caught off guard. "For me?" "Yes," she replied firmly. "Please, don't refuse it." His first instinct was hesitation. He didn't know her, didn't understand why she would want to give him something. He had helped her cross the street, that was all. Surely that didn't deserve a gift. "I appreciate it," he said carefully, "but I can't take anything from you. I didn't help for a reward." Her eyes narrowed just slightly, not in anger, but in determination. "It isn't payment," she said. "It's a key." Daniel tilted his head, confused. "A key." The woman nodded and tapped the envelope. "What's inside may not make sense to you now, but one day it will. Think of it as a door. You helped me, and in return, I want to help you. Not today, perhaps not tomorrow, but soon." Her words hung in the air like a mystery, heavy and intriguing. Daniel felt a chill run down his spine. He had expected nothing more than a quick thank you, maybe a kind blessing. Instead, he was now being handed something that sounded far bigger, far stranger. He hesitated again, but the look in her eyes kept him from refusing. They weren't the eyes of someone giving away something worthless. They were the eyes of someone who had carried a secret for a long time, waiting for the right person to pass it on to. Slowly, Daniel reached out and accepted the envelope. The paper felt rough beneath his fingers, old yet carefully preserved. He didn't open it right away. Somehow, he sensed that tearing it open in that moment would break the weight of what she was trying to give him. The elderly woman's expression softened when she saw him take it. She leaned back against the bench and let out a long, tired breath, as though a burden had been lifted. "You remind me so much of my son," she whispered again, almost to herself. "When I look at you, I feel as if fate has brought me here this morning not just to cross a street, but to meet you." Daniel sat in silence, his mind racing. Who was this woman really? Why did she carry such an envelope with her? And why did she choose to give it to him, a stranger she had only just met? The city around them continued its endless rush, but Daniel barely noticed it now. His focus was on the mysterious envelope in his hands and the woman who seemed to know more than she was saying. He wanted to ask questions, but something in her calm smile told him that answers would come in time. For now, all he could do was hold on to what she had given him and wait. Little did Daniel know that inside that envelope was not just paper. It was a path of connection to a part of her life that would soon cross into his, changing the direction of his future forever. Daniel sat there with the envelope resting in his hands, the rough paper almost humming with meaning. He wanted to open it, to peek inside right away, but something told him to wait. The old woman's gaze was steady on him, calm yet expectant, as if she already knew what questions were rushing through his mind. "Go on," she finally said softly. "Open it. You'll understand why I called it a key." Daniel hesitated for a moment longer, then carefully unfolded the flap. Inside, he found not money, not jewelry, not a photograph, but a folded sheet of paper with neat handwriting and a small card tucked within. His brows furrowed as he read the words. It wasn't just any note. It was a letter of introduction. The paper bore the name of a foundation he had never heard of before, a scholarship and mentorship program created years ago by the woman herself. Along with it was a card embossed with her name, Professor Eleanor Hayes. Daniel looked up in shock. You run a foundation." The woman nodded slowly, a gentle smile touching her lips. "I used to teach at the university for many years. After I retired, I devoted my savings to something that mattered to me, helping young people who had dreams but no support. The world forgets them too easily." Daniel was stunned. He stared at the paper again. His heart pounded as he realized what it meant. This wasn't just a thank you. It was an opportunity, a door to something he had never expected. But why give this to me? He asked, his voice filled with disbelief. The woman's eyes softened, and she reached out to place her frail hand over his. "Because you stopped," she said simply. "You saw me. In a world that rushes past the weak, you chose compassion over convenience. That tells me more about your character than any resume ever could. You remind me of the kind of student I always looked for, the kind who deserved a chance." Daniel sat in silence, the weight of her words sinking into him. All he had done was help her cross the street. He had never imagined such a small act could lead to something so extraordinary. The elderly woman leaned back, her eyes misty but proud. "That card will open a door for you. If you contact the number, they'll know I sent you. You will be considered for one of the special mentorship grants. It's not money alone, it's guidance, connections, a hand to lift you higher. Take it seriously." Daniel swallowed hard. He thought of his own struggles, how he had been working part-time jobs, juggling bills, and putting off his dreams because life was too heavy. The idea that someone like her, someone with power and history, would see him as worthy was almost overwhelming. He shook his head in disbelief. I don't know what to say." The woman chuckled softly. "Say nothing. Just use it well. That will be thanks enough." For the first time that morning, Daniel felt the ground shift beneath his feet, not from traffic or rushing footsteps, but from fate itself. A street he had nearly rushed across had led him to a turning point in his life. The envelope, simple and worn, had become the most valuable thing he had ever held. Not because of what it contained, but because of what it represented. Trust, opportunity, and the ripple of a single good deed. Daniel folded the letter carefully and slipped it back into the envelope. He held it close, almost afraid to let it out of his hands. He realized now that this morning was no accident. It felt as though destiny had placed him at that corner at just the right moment. The old woman, Professor Hayes, looked at him with quiet satisfaction. "Young man, I have met many students, many dreamers, but very few have the heart to stop and help when no one else does. That heart will carry you farther than you can imagine." Her words stayed with him, echoing louder than the noise of the city. Daniel felt humbled, almost unworthy, but deeply grateful. As they sat in silence for a few more moments, Daniel understood something powerful. Helping her had cost him nothing, just a few minutes of his time, a little bit of patience. But in return, he had been given something priceless, a chance to change his future, and though he didn't fully know it yet, that envelope would become the first step on a journey that would shape the rest of his life. Asterisk. The days after that meeting felt strange for Daniel. He carried the envelope with him everywhere inside his jacket pocket, sometimes tucked into his bag, but never far from reach. It wasn't just a piece of paper anymore. It felt like a spark, a promise that something in his life was about to change. At first, he wondered if it was even real. Perhaps it was just an old woman's way of thanking him, a kind gesture with no real outcome. But each time he pulled out the letter and read the name Professor Eleanor Hasey, felt the weight of truth. She hadn't looked like someone who made empty promises. Finally, after 2 nights of staring at the envelope on his desk, Daniel gathered the courage to dial the number written on the card. His hands trembled as the phone rang. A calm voice answered. "Hayes Foundation, how may I help you?" Daniel swallowed hard. "My name is Daniel Reed. Professor Hayes gave me this card." There was a brief silence, followed by a polite but firm reply. "Ah, I see. Please hold." When the line clicked back, another voice spoke, this one warmer and more certain. "Mr. Reed, we've been expecting your call." Those words sent a chill down his spine. Expecting? He had only just dialed. Yet it felt as though the path had been waiting for him long before he even stepped onto it. The following week, Daniel found himself in a quiet office lined with bookshelves, the kind of place that smelled of paper and wisdom. He sat nervously across from a man in a suit, one of the senior coordinators of the foundation. "Young man," the coordinator said, studying Daniel's file. "Professor Hayes spoke very highly of you. She told us you were the kind of person she wanted to see supported someone with both ambition and compassion. That combination is rare." Daniel shifted uneasily. "But I don't have much. My grades are good, but nothing extraordinary. I've been working part-time, just trying to keep things together." The man smiled faintly. "You underestimate yourself. What you lack in resources, you make up for in character. That is what Professor Hayes valued most in her students. That is why you're here." And with that, the coordinator explained the offer: a scholarship that would cover his studies fully, mentorship from professionals in his field, and the chance to join projects that could shape his career. Daniel could barely believe it. All of this because he had stopped to help someone cross the street. When he left the office that day, the city looked different to him. The same noise of traffic, the same rush of strangers, but now he saw it all through new eyes. He felt lighter, as though the world had quietly handed him a second chance. Weeks turned into months, and Daniel's life began to shift in ways he had never imagined. He no longer struggled to balance endless jobs just to pay tuition. Instead, he poured his energy into learning, into building, into dreaming bigger than he had ever dared. The mentorship program paired him with experienced leaders who guided him, not just in studies, but in life. For the first time, he felt seen not just as another young man trying to survive, but as someone who had potential worth investing in. Yet through it all, Daniel never forgot the moment that had started it. Each time he sat in a classroom, each time he worked late on a project, he thought back to that morning, the shaky hand of an elderly woman, the sound of her cane tapping the street, and the quiet words she had spoken. Sometimes the smallest moments open the biggest doors. Professor Hayes became more than just a stranger he had helped. She became a symbol in his life, reminder that kindness is never wasted, that destiny sometimes hides in the simplest acts. And every time Daniel passed a crosswalk crowded with people, he slowed down, scanning the edges of the street. He no longer walked past those who hesitated. He no longer rushed by when someone seemed invisible. Because he knew that the world changes, not through grand gestures, but through the moments when one person decides to stop and care. The scholarship was more than money, it was a turning point, a life-altering chance. But the true gift wasn't the paper or the program. The true gift was the lesson carved into his heart, that a single choice to help could change not only someone else's day, but his entire future. And as Daniel moved forward, building his path with determination, he carried that lesson like a compass, guiding him toward a life he never thought possible. Years passed, and Daniel's life no longer looked like the life of the young man who once hurried through the city streets, worrying about bills and deadlines. The scholarship from Professor Hayes' foundation had not only helped him finish his studies, but had also opened doors to opportunities he never imagined. He built a career, earned respect in his field, and slowly climbed to a place where people looked up to him. But through all the success, he never forgot that morning, the trembling hand of the elderly woman, her fragile voice saying, "You saw me?" Those words stayed with him, shaping every decision he made. Daniel began to live differently. Whenever he saw someone struggling, a mother juggling groceries, a child lost in a crowded station, or an old man hesitating at a crossing, he was the first to step forward. To him, kindness was no longer just a choice. It was a duty, a way of honoring the gift that had changed his life. One winter evening, years after he first met Professor Hayes, Daniel found himself standing once again at a busy intersection. The air was cold, his breath forming clouds in the air, and the crowd rushed past in heavy coats. He noticed a young boy holding a worn backpack, staring nervously at the traffic lights. The boy looked lost, scared, and invisible to everyone else. Without thinking, Daniel walked over. "Hey, are you okay?" he asked softly. The boy looked up with wide eyes, surprised that someone had stopped. I can't find the bus stop," he admitted quietly. Daniel smiled warmly, offering the same calm reassurance he once gave an elderly woman. "Don't worry, I'll help you." As he guided the boy, Daniel felt a familiar warmth in his chest, the same feeling he had felt years ago when he helped Professor Hayes. It was as if the circle had completed itself. The ripple had begun with her. One act of gratitude had changed his future, and now his own actions were rippling outward, touching others. He realized that kindness doesn't end with one person, it travels, growing stronger each time it is passed on.